It is our winter forecast episode of the Something in the Air podcast. I'm meteorologist Joe Martucci here. You know, September had plenty of local summer days here, but once the calendar flipped to October, that went away in a hurry here. And now we're staring down November, and you know what that means. Winter is not too far around the corner. As we do every year, we bring on a friend of the show, Dr. Judah Cohen, Director of Seasonal Forecasting at AER in Massachusetts, to talk all about his unique style of winter forecasting. And yes, if you wait till the end, we will talk about that winter forecast itself in South Jersey. Let's take it away to Dr. Judah Cohen. Well, fall is in the air, winter is around the corner, and that means we can only have one guest on the Something in the Air podcast here. We are with Dr. Judah Cohen, Director of Seasonal Forecasting at AER in Massachusetts. Dr. Cohen, Judah, it is great to be with you again, my friend.
All right, it's good. I'm glad, it's always a pleasure. Glad to be, the guys invited me back. And
yeah, well, listen, I love snow, so we had to have you back this year because last winter was awesome for us. Awesome. We had the snowiest January on record at Atlantic City International Airport. That was 33.2 inches of snow. And, I know you didn't get as much over there in the Boston area, but I thank you for bringing the snow our way.
Well, we did pretty well. We had close to about 55 inches in total for the whole winter.
Right. So well, it's a little different. We average like 16 inches, 17 inches.
We beat Worcester, I think, for the first time ever or something like that.
Wow. That's interesting because for people, to explain the Massachusetts geography, Worcester is a little further inland and more elevated.
That's right.
So you would think that they would
at least 1,000 feet. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So it gets pretty high up there. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about, how you're doing. We're going to talk about what goes into winter forecasting, some things you're thinking about. And, we'll finish on off with the winter forecast for us here in New Jersey. So let's start off with your work, right? And we say this every year when we're with you. But, the one thing that you're most known for is research about correlating October's weather conditions in different parts of the globe to what could happen here in, the northeastern United States. I know your research has evolved over time on this. So just tell us where we're at with that research right now.
Yeah, so I continue to explore the relationship between the thing that I'm best known for is Siberian or Eurasian snow cover extent. So the acronym SCE for those of us in the jargon, but that the relationship between October snow cover extent across Siberia, or it's mostly Siberia, but all of Eurasia, but it's really in Siberia in October, and the polar vortex, the behavior of the polar vortex, but ultimately what's important is our weather. So the temperatures, it has a strong relationship with temperature than precipitation, right. Actually. So. Will we have a cold or mild winter in the eastern U.S.? So the first predictor I'm looking at is that snow cover extent in the month of October.
Sure. And without giving too much of the winter forecast away now, how are we looking with that snow cover extent in Siberia this month?
Yeah. The train went off the rails on this one. I started out like record high pretty much, or, certainly over the past 15 years or so. And it has just flatlined. I've never seen anything like it. Got me all excited.
Right.
And then it just went off a cliff.
Okay. So is it fair to say we might be in uncharted territory with this year?
Yeah, we're uncharted. I also have an alternate index that's called the Snow Advance Index, which kind of takes, how fast the snow advanced. So like if you had a very slow start and a very fast finish, that would be a very big number for this what I call the SAI, the Snow Advance Index. And this is like gone in reverse. So this is it's in as far as in the tank as it's ever been. Because basically it started off high and it's just there's no growth.
Right. So
As
places
far as
have
that
melted
goes,
back
I think
snow.
we're like definitely in uncharted territories. But
Uncharted territory. All right. So we'll get into what that means in a little bit. There's also some other uncharted territory with our weather conditions as well. We'll talk about in a sec. I just want to go through last year real quick.
Yeah.
I did say that January was awfully snowy for us here in New Jersey, but that was kind of it. Once the end of January happened, it was pretty, quiet for February and March. Take us through what we were seeing in October with that Siberian snow cover, and then just real quick how the polar vortex interacted with us during the winter.
Yes, I mean, I do say it was like a stealthy winter last year. Kind of, didn't have the big flashy headlines, but it was pretty cold for the country. I mean, it started out pretty mild overall, and I think a lot of the winters are like that. I mean, it's hard to get a cold December.
Yeah.
So but the kind of the trend has been, a really mild start. Those on weather Twitter like to use, blowtorch,
Yes.
to describe those mild patterns in the winter. And certainly it started off blowtorchy. But then, the end of December, the signs were there that, the pattern was changing. The polar vortex was going to get more involved. So it was quite strong early on. And then, it started stretching. And once it started stretching, it just couldn't stop. I think I counted maybe 7 stretches in a row. None of them were very large, so you could have, I mean, that in general, these polar vortex stretches or elongations, so the polar vortex kind of acts like a taffy or, rubber band, it kind of pulls apart, but stays, stays whole. It doesn't split into pieces like sometimes can happen in the most dramatic polar vortex disruptions.
Right.
And then it snaps back. So those polar vortex disruptions tend to be short in duration, but what's important for the U.S., they can have very high impact. Where the cold is focused can differ. So in January, the cold, and the snow was focused here along these coasts, but then it started shifting further and further west. So we got into a milder pattern, but the stretching was going on, and we were still in a cold pattern for the country, but where the cold was kind of concentrated was different.
Yeah, and what I should let's back up a little bit and talk about what is the polar vortex, right? So explain to us what the polar vortex is, and then explain that difference again between a stretching polar vortex event and a polar vortex split.
Okay, yeah. So the polar vortex is an area of low pressure, sits right over the North Pole. It's pretty high in the atmosphere. So it's in the stratosphere, maybe 5 to 15 miles above the Earth's surface. And like all low pressures, from a hurricane to a snowstorm to the polar vortex, there's a counterclockwise circulation around it. So you tend to have this flow of air west to east because it's sitting typically right on the North Pole. And you have this fast flowing ribbon of river air that kind of circumnavigates or circulates around the center of the polar vortex. And in its normal state, it's pretty strong and stable. So the air is kind of it's only in one direction, unidirectional, from west to east. And I like to give the analogy of a spinning top. So when this polar vortex, is this, and when its spinning top is kind of in this fast, quiet rotation, it just sits in place and spins quickly and keeps everything kind of close to the center there. The same thing happened with the polar vortex. It's fast spinning, kind of ribbon or river air, and it kind of keeps the cold air locked up over the Arctic region. And then on the southern side of that, kind of jet or ribbon or fast flowing ribbon or river of air is much milder temperatures. And that's the normal state. Now, sometimes the polar vortex can get disrupted or weakens, and it takes on different forms. The one that's been most studied and is best well known is called these sudden stratospheric warmings, because a lot of warm air rushes in to the Arctic towards the North Pole and kind of very strongly disrupts the circulation of around the polar vortex. Polar vortex itself can either get, kind of bodily moved off the North Pole, pretty, southward into the mid latitudes even. And either it could stay together as one piece, or it could, even the most extreme examples, will split into two different polar vortices called daughter vortices, even sometimes into three, but those tend to be very short-lived. So that's and those are the best well-known, and they happen once every 2 years about. But what I've been really focusing on the research is these really less understood and appreciated, not really discussed in the literature, and I don't think really discussed too much by meteorologists, is this, what I like to call stretch polar vortex. Is it, people use different terms in the literature, and it's probably too technical to why I like to call it stretch. But visually, the polar vortex really stretches out like, filament. So again, like if you pull taffy apart, take on that kind of configuration. And if you think about it, the polar vortex is typically has the circular, circulation. It's keeping the cold air, so on the northern peripheries where is like kind of the cold air only gets towards the northern periphery of that circulation. But if you pull it further and further apart, and and the kind of the polar vortex is extending further and further south, that leaves, so the cold air inside of it can move to more southerly latitudes, and so certainly can get into the, where, let's say, the really extreme cold is typically in Canada, it can now make it into the U.S. So my most recent paper that first author on was the winter of 2013-14, because that was the first time the media used the term polar vortex.
Yeah.
There's a lot of confusion because there were not. So when you talk about the polar vortex, you typically, the polar vortex bringing severe winter weather is mostly associated with these very extreme disruption of the polar vortex, like where it splits or gets displaced to much further south. But what happened that winter, and really I don't think anybody really appreciated or understood it, was just stretching. There were none of these big breakdowns. Again, that talks about the sun stratospheric warming, and I could talk about what exactly how it's defined, but
sure,
it gets a little technical. But none of those occurred in the winter, so it was a very confusing. But so I talk about it. The winter was very interesting. It was very severe. It was, of the past, I think 20 years, certainly the most severe winter in North America.
Depending on where you are, Atlantic City, it was last January we were getting it. But
February was probably pretty. It was probably pretty cold in February 2014.
It was, and I do remember that. Yeah, what we're going to do is we're going to take a break here, and then on the other side of it, we're going to talk more about the polar vortex with Dr. Judah Cohen, and we're going to talk about the actual winter forecast that we will see here in New Jersey as we go into our winter. You're listening to the Something in the Air podcast. And we are back with the Something in the Air podcast. We are here with Director of Seasonal Forecasting at AER in Massachusetts, Dr. Judah Cohen. It is our annual winter weather preview. First half, we talked a lot about the polar vortex and last winter. And now let's get into the meat and potatoes of this forecast here. So this winter, let's talk about a couple of factors that are going into the forecast. And I want to start off with La Nina here. That's the waters off the equatorial Pacific Ocean. In other words, off the coast of Peru. They're going to be below average, cooler than average for the third consecutive winter. Now, that's unusual. In fact, that's downright rare here. So how does that factor into your forecasting, if we can just talk about the La Nina specifically?
Yeah, so definitely a factor in our forecast as well. I don't know, the third time it had, third in a row. I was looking, the only time I saw that it's happened before is 74 through 76. Not a very memorable stretch of winters on the East Coast. But I don't know what, what third time means. Why we expect the third to be different from the second or the first, but it looks like to me Noah's going with a straight up, kind of La Nina, just classical pattern. And
Yeah.
I have no reason to
And
believe it.
Judah, if I may, real quick, just to talk about the NOAA forecast before we hop back into what you have to say. They're leaning for a warmer than average winter and really equal chances of it being drier or wetter here. So no real strong signal from NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. I'll turn it back over to you.
Yeah, I know. I know. Look, that's I don't think they hide the fact that they really strongly rely on the ENSO signal, El Nino Southern Oscillation, this being the cold phase of that oscillation, so La Nina. It's a factor. I mean, it definitely favors colder to the northwest, milder to the south and east across North America. I would guess we kind of saw that, the past two winters that have been La Nina, I think the cold has been more focused to our west. I would certainly, I'm not going to disagree, argue that La Nina didn't play a role there. I think that the polar vortex determines whether the U.S. has a cold or mild winter, and then kind of La Nina kind of focuses the region. So if you have a weaker polar vortex, we have a colder winter. If it's a La Nina, maybe that cold is further west. If you have a weaker, polar vortex, a cold winter, and now you have an El Nino, you tend to, the colder air gets shifted further east. So, a really classical winter where we had a weak polar vortex and El Nino was 2009-10.
Okay.
But I mean, we're not having an El Nino, and I don't.
Right.
So
Right. No El Nino for us here, and then let's talk about the polar vortex again. You're real big about the polar vortex stretching or elongating as we go into the winter. In fact, if I can get the internet to work for me very quickly, I'm going to read your last tweet that you had. That was on, today, October 20th. Not much is going on in the near term that has me excited about the weather other than this morning's polar vortex animation that is suggestive of another stretched polar vortex that could bring colder weather to eastern North America in winter. So I know you used the word could in there, not would, I mean, but let's talk about the polar vortex and what you think is going to happen as we go into the winter.
Yeah. So La Nina, again, this is not very strong relationship, but La Nina is thought to support or favor a stronger polar vortex. So we have that. There's another tropical oscillation called the QBO, quasi-biennial oscillation. We don't need to get technical, but that isn't, it's also a westerly and easterly phase, or stronger, weaker, and it's in the kind of the stronger phase westerly. So that's thought to think also to favor a stronger polar vortex. So they're, in the background, in the environment, there seems to be, a major breakdown, a really more extreme breakdown. The predictors that I'm looking at, everybody else is looking at, tend to favor maybe a stronger polar vortex. So I think if we get, meaningful winter weather, it's at least early on in the winter, I think it's more likely to come from a stretched polar vortex. It's certainly, it's been stretching. It's been very early. We had a very early and very high, amplitude, extreme example of it already. Where places were having the earliest snow and record, early record cold. I mean, if we had that type of event, into January, I mean, it would definitely be making headlines, and it would be causing problems. But so I think, so that's what I'm looking for. I think if we're going to get, at least in let's say the first half of the winter, I think if we're going to get impactful winter weather, is going to come from a stretched polar vortex, then let's say, extreme, one of those more extreme breakdowns of the polar vortex. The last time that happened was in, January 2021. And I think as we get later, maybe into February, I think that there's a higher chance maybe of a polar, a more extreme polar vortex breakdown, but that's getting, way ahead of myself. Overall, I see no reason. Again, I'll say it and then the opposite will happen. I mean, the trend is your friend. I certainly believe in that. So, I mean, this milder start to the winter, I'm not seeing any signs to, buck that trend. I mean, but things can, especially with these stretched polar vortices, I mean, things can change pretty quickly. It's not a very long horizon in trying to anticipating. The more extreme events, I think, we could. Well, I'm pushing the envelope on this, but I think
That's your job.
Maybe see it a month out or something. They take much longer to happen, right?
Right.
So, I mean, there's no sign, absolutely no sign. I mean, first of all, they tend not to happen until January anyway. But right now, I mean, the circulation in the atmosphere is just really not favorable for a big breakdown. I mean, it's not really favorable for any kind of disruption of the polar vortex. So I'm curious why the GFS is even showing kind of suggestive of the stretching. But the thing to look is, so it's October 20th, but the thing to look for, if we can get some Greenland blocking, again, the pattern, I mean, there's an energy shortage worldwide and, people are wishing for different things. And I don't mean to make it hard for anybody, not wishing for that. But Greenland blocking is one of the precursors that we found for these polar vortex stretching. So, the models are kind of suggesting it could happen. So that's the first thing I'd be, again, I don't know how technical you want me to get or get into the weeds here, for the.
We'll keep it nice and easy for everyone.
Yeah, so high pressure, I guess. So I'm looking for like early signs of maybe these polar vortex stretching. So one early sign would be what we call in the business Greenland blocking, but that's high pressure over
right.
Greenland.
And what that does, just to let everybody know, when you got that Greenland blocking, it helps to kind of clog up the lanes that coastal storms can travel on, and can, if you get a storm, make it maybe a little more of a powerful and longer lasting storm, right, which could be snow. We always got to battle with that rain-snow line, whether it's here in New Jersey or Judah is in Massachusetts, but it at least offers the opportunity if you're a snow lover for some bigger snows.
Yeah. So, the Greenland blocking, for guys that are looking, winter weather enthusiasts, that people are looking for that Greenland blocking. I'm looking at this is like a different, kind of expectation from the Greenland blocking. It would be kind of a transitory phenomena that, and kind of moves to the east. As it moves east, it can then kick off one of these polar vortex. If it hangs out in Greenland, I don't think it actually will stretch the polar vortex. But so that's where it starts, and then kind of gets swept up with the jet stream and moves east. And as it moves east, that's when it can kick off like one of these stretched polar vortex events. I don't know why why it starts at Greenland and then kind of moves away, but
right, the world may never know.
So I guess if you maybe just think that the weather in general moves from west to east, so
right.
It's got to get towards Scandinavia. That's where the blocking is really key.
Got it.
It's there. That's when the magic happens. If you're looking forward to a snowstorm or some cold weather.
Gotcha. So we'll be on the lookout for that. So it sounds like to me, right, we're talking about early winter, November, December, generally mild, though there is the potential for a intrusion of cold air briefly. Would that be fair to say? Is that what we're watching?
I don't see any long duration cold. I mean, I feel pretty not going, but we could have a brief event, and then like last winter, once it gets snowing, they can be kind of in a series, a sequence. So I mean, then December could be very different than what I certainly expected. Sitting here in October. Right. Again, it's very early for me, for us when we put out a forecast.
Sure.
So we're really pushing. I mean, now's a very popular time to talk about the winter because NOAA is putting out their forecast. But
right. And then tell us about what at least you can tell us about January, February, and March.
Wow. Well, I mean, looking at my prediction, so the snow, I mean, we talked about the snow. I mean, I think it'll come in, a little bit above normal just because it had such a big start. But I mean, it is, again, it is flatlined, almost, really, very anomalously so, almost unprecedented.
That Siberian snow cover.
Yeah, I mean, it's supposed to, it's the time of year it's supposed to advance the quickest.
Yeah.
And it's doing nothing.
Yeah.
And the pattern is now, I mean, it's going to move, but it's really, the pattern has not been, even still, it's not looking great. So, we'll see where that, but I do think there's even though I really do focus on October, I think the snow cover can have an impact even later in the winter. I don't really measure it and use it in the forecast anymore, but I'll be watching for it.
Got it.
So, I mean, right now, it certainly doesn't look to me like really favor, a big breakdown of the vortex and,
right.
Followed by, the long duration cold. I just don't see it right now. So
it looks like for the winter then in whole, you're anticipating it to be on the mild side, and it's really going to
sitting here October 20th.
Yeah.
Things are looking, to favor a milder winter. Yeah.
Right. Milder winter. And in terms of precipitation, whether it's rain or snow, do you have a lean on that?
Well, and I think La Nina is actually a stronger forcing for the precipitation pattern than even the polar vortex. So, I mean, we put in other predictors and I haven't run the model yet on that, but I mean, I don't expect it to look too different than what NOAA put out, maybe pretty dry. I mean, though what we have out there so far is looking pretty dry for the East Coast.
Right.
But as I haven't put all the predictors in. Let's see if it turns wetter. But right now, it's definitely leaning on the drier side. But again, if it's mild, I mean, it's hard. I guess you might say, well, Atlantic City. I don't know. Did the winter come in overall mild in Atlantic City, and you still had all that snow? I mean, so sometimes on the East Coast, you can get one or two big ones, and and you're way above normal for the winter, even though it's mild.
Right.
So I'm not ruling out. I just. I mean, as I see it now, I mean, I think, I don't see anything close to, or at least certainly for Atlantic City, anything to rival what happened last winter. But it's early, and certainly could be wrong.
Got it. But, well, we're gonna hope that your forecast, is accurate, even though we both love our snow and our cold. But I think in short, to recap, generally milder. Generally leaning drier, but it's like hurricane season. It only takes one big snowstorm for you to remember it as an active year. So It's the same concept here.
And as a caveat, my colleague at work, one of my colleagues who works with me on the forecast, says every winter I start, the forecast starts out really mild, and as it gets closer and closer to winter, it gets colder and colder. So
right, that's it.
Have me back on, right at post Thanksgiving. Let's see if I'm singing a different tune at that point.
Well, we shall definitely see. Maybe we'll do a midwinter check-in with you. But Dr. Cohen, we do appreciate it. You can follow him at Judah47, Judah47 on Twitter. Judah, I do appreciate you being with us here on the Something in the Air podcast again this year.
Oh yeah, it was a pleasure, and hopefully you'll have me back next year too.
We'll see how the forecast goes. I'm just kidding. We'll definitely have you back on.
Forecast. I know how it is. It's tough.
It's tough,
dog even when it comes to weather forecasting. Right?
Yeah, it's tough, but I always enjoy speaking with you, and I appreciate all the help you've given me over the past couple of years. So really, it's fantastic to have you on.
It's great. It's always a lot of fun, and yep.
Awesome.
I hope as long as you'll have me, I'll be here. So.
Yep. Nope. No doubt. And we'll be back with you guys on November 2nd. That's going to be our next Something in the Air podcast. We're going to recap the month of October with Dr. Dave Robinson, someone Judah Cohen knows as well. And then we'll have more episodes for you, of course, as we round out throughout the year. Thanks for listening to the Something in the Air podcast.